It's with a great deal of pleasure that I welcome you back to the new year in Oakland's public schools. I've been here a short time, but yet my days have been filled. I've been talking and listening to teachers, students, parents, administrators, to religious leaders and businessmen, and to plain people of the community. What I have heard has moved and affected me profoundly and filled me with a sense of awe. There is in Oakland a fresh wind stirring, a movement within men and women from all walks of life, a message so unmistakably clear, so tangible that you can almost reach out and touch it with your hands. And that message is this: Oakland's time is now. Our time, our season, our opportunity to seize the main chance, our time to write a new chapter in the history of American education. Looking out at you today, I see only the confirmation of this message. Your aspirations for children and for yourselves, your professional competence, the ideals which brought you into this field. These are all the ingredients we need to put everything together in Oakland. Now, I say this in full realization that the national picture is not one of optimism. Our national priorities upside down. The war has scarred and rent our country with controversy, dislocated our economy, distorted our political system, and brought unanticipated challenges to our institutional life. Our failure to solve the American dilemma concerning human rights has brought into question all that we stand for as a democracy. And our schools have often been at the center of the storm, operating under a kind of crisis management. School systems across the country find themselves beset and beleaguered, and many at the brink of bankruptcy. There have been charges and countercharges here in Oakland, as well as there might be. We have had dissent and turmoil, and there's been much about which persons of goodwill might disagree. Yes, our own school system, as well as those elsewhere at every level, has been both the focus and indeed the locus of the social revolution. And I say this is as it should be. No other institution has promised so much, yet the chasm between our promise and our performance, particularly for the urban poor and minority groups, is there for all to see. And all this is not behind us. Indeed, in our drive to systematize our approaches to teaching and learning, we cannot, we must not attempt to shut out the world. As Mark Shedd, the superintendent of Philadelphia schools, has said on occasion, it is the passion and power of humanity that we seek to explore and expand when we teach reading and math. And if we divorce school subjects from the guts and hopes of human beings, we can expect students to find them gutless and hopeless. So what shall we do here in Oakland? Our hallmark will be a relentless search for the improvement of basic skills for all our children. We have to utilize all the tools that are available to us. The resource that we have in reading, the book that has been worked on by so many competent people in the system, is available for every teacher K through 12. It will remain just a compendium of information unless someone breathes life into it and helps it to make a difference in the learning of boys and girls. So we have to use all of the material resources that we have. We're certainly going to have to utilize new management techniques. We have to subject ourselves to a process to identify both citywide and school-wide objectives. We have to use the problem-solving approach. Our management has to be done in terms of our objectives, cost effectiveness, PPBS, and all the rest. We'll have to set up a kind of accountability system where each one in the system is saying what he will be responsible for over a given time span. This is almost a trite concept. It's being mouthed so much today. But unless we hold ourselves accountable, not much really happens. We're going to need data. And this brings me to the need for testing. You heard me say in talking to some of you when I talked to some groups last week that testing is an essential part of teaching. I like to use the analogy of the doctor and the teacher. When you go to the doctor, you don't stand in front of him and smile and say, "Here I am, guess what's wrong with me?" You subject yourselves to some diagnostic procedures. The teacher, in dealing with the youngster in the class, can't expect to put the question to the youngster, "Tell me what's wrong with you." But we have to begin using certain diagnostic techniques to find out where he is, to assess his present status. And that's testing, diagnostic testing. You see, even the Boy Scout wandering in the woods has to know where he's been, where he is, and have some notion of where he's going, else he's lost. Now, if a Boy Scout in the woods needs this kind of information, certainly a teacher who's playing a critical part in the life of a child has to make some assessment of where that child is at a given moment. And going back to the analogy with the doctor, he begins a course of treatment. Then after a certain length of time, he tests again to see if the patient is getting better. You might call that a kind of achievement test, to see what achievement is made in getting well. The teacher, after having made some assessment through diagnostic procedures of what the child's needs might be, applies treatment, her instructional program. And at some point she wants to turn around and say, "Now, how well are we doing? Has my teaching been effective?" That's testing again. And then in the light of that data, or those data, the teacher begins to revise her practices if they have not been effective. The same as the doctor. If the treatment is not taking, he doesn't try the same thing. He alters the treatment procedure. And then indeed, after altering the procedure, if the patient continues not to get well, he's not embarrassed to turn around and say, "I want to call in a consultant, someone who has specific knowledge in this area of difficulty." And so the teacher, after she has gone through an instructional program, tested, and found out that their teaching is ineffective, shouldn't hesitate to call in the psychologist, call in the psychiatrist, the counselor, the parents, anyone to give additional information so the treatment program can be revised. Yes, there will be testing. We can't argue that there has been some abuse in the use of testing. When we use testing to label children and set up the kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that says to a child, "You look stupid to me," then we give him preposterous school tests to do, and when he fails we say, "See there, you couldn't even do that." And then to confirm that, we test and say, "That proves it." Now that's an abuse of test use. And then we hear the term culture-free tests. I think that if we could devise such a test, I would question how useful it could be. We don't live in a culture-free society. How useful would it be for me to take a test on how to survive in the Kalahari Desert, and I'm living in Oakland? We need to give tests that give us some notion of how well children are doing those things which society prizes and rewards, with better jobs, with promotion, with full participation in a highly technical society. And if at this time in our history, the middle class tends to prize the ability to speak well, to present oneself publicly in a certain way, to be able to listen attentively, because those skills are held as by the middle class as important, it doesn't diminish their importance. If the goal of the school is to teach every child those fundamental skills and habits and attitudes that will enable him to reach his highest self-fulfillment and at the same time be able to participate effectively in the society of which he's a part, then speaking is part of that in prestige English. Reading is part of it. Counting is part of it. And we're going to have to know how well our children read, write, and count. So we will be doing testing. There are certain tests, because of the populations on which they have been standardized, are unfair to certain type children. We'll have to admit that and change our tests. But it's not the test that's wrong. It's the abuse that's made of test results. Now, in order to deal with some of the abuses that are made of test results, I propose that we establish a superintendent's committee on testing, and to include on that committee some of the teachers who raised this question initially, so that we can ferret out what the concerns are, so that our teachers can become skilled diagnosticians in dealing with learning difficulties and can use tests effectively. We hope to have that committee established shortly after the opening of school. One last word on testing. Someone raised the objection and said that teachers use the test to label. You see, teachers who do that will find some other way to label children if you take the test away. And I don't want to rob good teachers of that tool. Someone else complained to me that teachers will teach the test or teach in order to test. And I respond that a teacher who would do that, if he teaches the test, probably taught more than he would have taught under any other circumstances. So there will be accountability all the way along the line, from the superintendent right through to the custodial staff, the cafeteria staff. All of us will be goal-oriented, and we will be holding ourselves accountable. Another thing in Oakland we want to do is send out a different signal about the reward system. As you know, in most bureaucracies, whether we're talking about a school bureaucracy or an industrial bureaucracy, the reward system usually works with those who can keep their department cool and keep things running smoothly. It works for those who can get along with their immediate superior and be nice and smile. But don't let anything exciting happen in the school. Don't let it make the papers negatively. And hold tight, and you'll get your reward. Well, the system has changed. The reward system will work for those who dare to take risks, those who dare to do something that's different, to take a chance. If one dares, it means there may be failure. But yet if everything we did, we've met success, we might not be reaching far enough beyond our grasp. So sometimes we may have to fall down. The system will work for those who dare to establish meaningful relationships with the community, even though at sometimes that may seem to create a little turmoil in the school. But in some of the institutions that are insipid, perhaps a little turmoil will help. You see, we know that in our institutional life, the cooling out process results in a kind of caricature of humanity and in organizational paralysis. Churchill described this with caustic eloquence, calling the British Empire in the 30s, in describing that, he said, they were decided only to be undecided, resolved only to be irresolute, adamant for drift, solid for fluidity, all powerful to be impotent. You see, our reward system is just the opposite of that. Dare to be potent, dare to be powerful in bringing about the needed change. I've alluded to the importance of community involvement a number of times, and here I'm talking about not community involvement for window dressing, but involvement because the school as an airtight clinic never was a worthwhile notion. You know that I've already taken steps to give the community a meaningful role in the selection process for the principal at Castlemont, King Elementary, and Woodrow Wilson Junior High Schools. You see, it's the process that's important. When students have a meaningful role in selecting the principal, then students feel free to say to a principal, "Sir, we helped bring you here, and we expect a different kind of performance. Your performance before the committee was much better than your performance since you've been here. What happened?" Parents can feel free when they've had a part in the selection process of saying to principals, "Friend, we brought you here because we believe in you, and we want to continue to believe in you. But you're going to have to run a different game because you're not living up to what we thought you'd promised us." I'm talking about empowering people. And the only way people have power is if they've had meaningful roles in a decision-making process. You see, it works both ways. A community that has helped to place a principal in his job is committed by that very act to helping that principal succeed. I used to say to some of my principal friends back east, they didn't have to worry so much about establishing a union to protect principals' working conditions and protect themselves against brutal personnel problems. The best kind of job insurance any principal can have is a faculty, students, and a community at his back saying, "You're doing the job, brother, keep on." That's the kind of job insurance we want. Now, it's in this belief that we're prepared to develop a kind of multiple option approach. And this is based on the notion that there's a different level of readiness on the part of communities across any city to participate in this process. Some are ready to move right in and continue to perform as home and school associations, as dads clubs, to continue to the kind of informal participation that pays off. I've seen some schools since I've been here who operate their community involvement model on that informal arrangement, and it works. They've established summer programs at one school. This year they're looking forward with great anticipation to beginning a non-graded program at another school. So that informal participation can be effective if you want to spell out that as an option. Some others may rather operate under a more formal arrangement, the kind of advisory board arrangement. Some others may rather operate under a more formal arrangement, the kind of advisory board arrangement, where community people sit down and hear what the principal has to say and offer advice and suggestions. And that arrangement may work for some. And then still there are other communities where the people may be ready to say, let us have a part in the decision-making process, a meaningful role in having the final say. Now notice I keep talking about community participation in the decision-making process. I'm not talking about community control, because there's no such thing as community control. These are state institutions, and we're bound by state statute, some of which we can't abdicate and give away to people. But we can share in increasingly effective ways our decision-making prerogative with the community. And I think that's where we are going to have to move. And we hope to help you work that out. And whatever your level of participation is, be it informal, rather structured, or the highly structured approach, I feel that central office must have the resources to help you implement the model that seems most appropriate for your school. We're committed to the notion that the school site is the primary vehicle for parent and community involvement. That is, out there in the field, at the local school site, we're going to get the payoff. The battle will be won or lost in individual classrooms out in the field. But at the same time, this notion of community involvement will stretch beyond the school site and encompass the entire city. We are talking about establishing or reactivating the Master Plan Citizens Committee. And I will shortly propose to the Board of Education a plan to bring about such a committee. A public hearing will be held with organizations from throughout Oakland, and they will be invited to testify as to the most appropriate means for selecting members, the size of the committee, the mandate and its duration, and so forth. I believe the most urgent issue before this group will be the development of short and long-range plans for delivering uniformly excellent school facilities for our students and our staff. It is of course true that many of our buildings do not meet earthquake standards, that our physical arrangements sometimes do not facilitate the reduction of racial isolation, that we may in some cases be operating uneconomically because we are using units that are too small. But more than anything else, it is a source of anguish to me that so many of our buildings are simply a disgrace. Those buildings are saying something to our children. They are saying that this is good enough for you. I was at one school site that was in an advanced stage of dilapidation. And here these parents were sitting down talking with me and saying rather timidly, Mr. Foster, could you get us some paint to paint the buildings? And I was trying to figure out a way to get a bulldozer in there and knock the whole thing down and clear it out. And then when I got back and looked at some of the test results in that school, they were good. They had brought about an increment of growth. And then I really began to despair, because given those adverse conditions, those teachers were able to produce results. What would they have done if they had had optimum conditions under which to work? See, we're talking about dealing with children who are 2 grades behind, and they were able to prove 1.5 in their special little project, which was excellent, but it still didn't catch them up. And as I looked at that dilapidated school, I could think of another school I had visited just the week before. Beautiful brick structure, grass manicured, was all the, someone was on his knees clipping it with scissors. And I don't want that school to have less, I want that school to have more. But I want to bring these other schools up to those standards. You see, to go to school, and especially in these athletic contests, when you have to leave a dilapidated building to go to some fine school and then play your game and come back to your little hovel, that says to you that you are not quite worthy of these facilities. That's debilitating, it's debasing, it's denigrating, and I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be a part of that. And one of the heavy charges we'll lay on this Citizens Committee will be to take a look and try to bring to a uniform standard of excellence all of our facilities in Oakland. Some of you know, before arriving, I asked the Board of Education to authorize a study by Blue Ribbon Management Analysis firm, Pricewaterhouse, to assist me in assessing and making plans for the improvement of management effectiveness in Oakland Public Schools. You know, the board approved that study. The Pricewaterhouse team has labored long and hard, subjecting our operations to arduous scrutiny and gathering opinions and data from a wide variety of sources. And I want to share with you now some of their basic viewpoints and findings. And I've lifted these right from the preliminary document. There are 10. More effective resource allocation and management. Goals, priorities, and objectives. In order to make significant improvements in the use of resources, it is absolutely essential that a clear statement of goals and objectives be developed along with a statement of the priorities among them. Recasting the 1970-71 budget in order that the board and superintendent can see how the resources of the system are now being allocated to programs, we propose to develop a plan by which the present budget can be recast into a programmatic format. Let me explain that just a bit. In one school system where I found myself working, the stated priorities were early childhood education. The first one was reading, and then the second priority was early childhood education. And we took a line-by-line budget and recast it programmatically to find out where the money was going. And it turned out that reading was fourth. Most of the money in that system was going into physical education, art, and music. And I have nothing against that. There are beautiful programs of witness of music in the lives of these young people. They've lifted us all spiritually. But if we say our priority is reading, then we have to somehow allocate our resources in a way that that allocation matches our priority. This is another way of saying, put your money where your priorities are. That's what we intend to do. Returning now to the Pricewaterhouse study, we believe that the following principles must underlie the management reorganization. The management reorganization should be accomplished within present levels of expenditure for supporting functions. Simply means that we want to do this within our present budget. Resources committed to the support of basic skills and other high priority programs should be increased. Some of the management responsibilities now with the central office should be allocated to regional organizations, each headed by an associate superintendent. Within each region, the school should be the basic unit for decentralized management and for community participation. 5, parents and other members of the community are a resource which should be more effectively utilized. School staff should participate in the development of school objectives. The allocation of authority and responsibility for decision-making must be clarified. Additional management resources should be allocated to the planning function. The management reorganization should result in unifying separate central organizational units with like functions. Adequate resources on a continuing basis should be committed to management training and development. Now, these highly generalized statements were lifted out of context from an interim report, but they will be elaborated and documented further. But they may give you a sense of the direction in which we will be moving. We are talking about change in Oakland, change to catch the gathering wind, not after 2 years of study or a year of introspection. We're talking about change now. Let's begin the process today, right now. First, some steps to which I am committing myself and the central administration, and then some challenges for all of us. I propose then, in the next few minutes, to state boldly some of the objectives that central administration will be accepting. Objectives for which we can be held accountable, because I'm not asking teachers to do what I don't dare to do. See, it's easy to hold somebody else accountable and you sit in judgment. But it's a little more difficult when you step out in the same arena and subject yourself to the same accountability. And this is what I propose to do in the next few minutes, to let you know what we are saying that we want to do in a given time frame to help reach the objectives and the goals of this, and reach the goals of this system. First, I will submit to the Board of Education by its meeting on October 13th a draft statement of the overall goals of the Oakland Unified School District. Prior to their adoption as policy, I anticipate that the board will want to hold full and complete hearings to receive the maximum number of additions, deletions, and amendments. We need a doctor or nurse, please, to step over to the door on this side. Thank you. Pending board confirmation, let me go back to this item 1. What we're simply saying there is that for a system to formulate objectives, somehow we have to lay goals that are district-wide and widely accepted and held by all, so that the individual site units will be able to establish objectives that will relate to those goals. And these goals that we propose to submit to the board as a point of departure will be goals that have been developed out of my experience with urban education, out of the experience of senior staff members, out of the conversations I've had around the city with a variety of groups, with the studies that we've made of the documents that show what this system is doing performance-wide for children. So we won't just pick these goals out of the air. And then in public hearings, the public can make its input. And the public certainly means that school teachers who want to come and testify may testify. All the organizations and interest groups can look at those goals. But we are promising to have the draft of those goals before the board by October 13th. Pending board confirmation, we will take immediate steps to appoint 3 regional associate superintendents, each serving approximately 22,000 children. These executives will be, in effect, my alter ego in the field, providing full administrative and instructional leadership. After their selection, steps will be taken to determine 3 appropriate regions, to free up or establish facilities for the district associate superintendents so that they can be located in the regions they will serve, and to begin the reallocation of certain central educational resource personnel to each region. We expect to have much of this accomplished by January 1st, and the process complete in every respect by the end of the school year. This is part of the concept of decentralization, of moving resources closer to people who have to use those resources. Bureaucracies, because they are so ponderous, don't respond quickly enough to the needs of the local areas. And by having the resources out where they can be utilized, we can have a much more effective delivery system of our educational talent. It's tied in with the notion of accountability. You can't hold a man accountable for 68,000 children in a city, but you can hold him responsible for 22,000 scattered in a high school and a few junior high schools and elementaries. As you break your unit down, then you can intensify the area in which you can assess accountability. So we propose to move on with that concept, pending board approval. 3, in order to be able to tell how much we're spending in math, reading, physical education, or English, and learn how better to put our money where our priorities are, I am proposing that we make every effort to recast our budget in program terms by February 1st. That'll take some doing, but that's our goal. This will largely be a manual procedure, which will not be supported by complete accounting and reporting systems in the school year 1970-71. We will, however, implement the necessary budget, data processing, payroll, personnel and accounting support systems so that the board, staff, and community will be able to make more informed and effective decisions about the limited resources available to achieve progress. And this is just a way of looking at where our money's going. I was studying some figures on vandalism for the schools around the city. And when you take the vandalism and add it to the theft and fire damage, it comes to a considerable amount for some schools. I looked at the safety patrols that you have, yard patrol, where citizens are paid to come in and keep order and keep children from hurting each other. And we spend considerable money on that. And when we look at that programmatically and see the need in the reading area, I'm prepared to say to schools, if you can eliminate your vandalism, if you can cut down on the theft, eliminate the fires, get volunteer help and eliminate the need for paying people to keep children from hurting each other. Put in a program that makes children enjoy being together. If you can do that, then take that money you save and apply it to reading, one of the other priorities. See, you can't get that kind of handle on the system until you begin to look at what's happening programmatically to your money. So we propose to have that in place by February 1st. 4, we will develop several alternative models for parents and community involvement in local schools. And these multiple options should go out to the schools no later than November 1st. What I'm saying here, that central office will take the responsibility, working along with others, to prepare a series of guidelines for a number of options for bringing parents and community into the operation of the school. And schools should have that by November 1st to begin to look at what the schools are going to do and which option seems to be most feasible. And I want to hasten to say that we're not talking in two different ways at the same time. See, we're talking decentralization, and yet I'm saying that the central office is going to send out a proposal for options. But what I'm saying here is that you need something to begin with. Schools shouldn't have to rediscover the wheel each time. I spent a year in Philadelphia devising with others on a 68-man team, devising a system for decentralization and community control. Now, to put 68 people through the agony we went through for a whole year would be wasteful of your time and mine. So we'll draw on some of that experience, along with the experience of other people, and lay before you an array of options, with the understanding that you may take A and B and put them together and come up with a kind of C, that you won't have to follow slavishly the options as presented, but they become a point of departure. Now, at the same time, on that November 1st date, we expect to have in operation the full-fledged master plan committee. Number 6, the district must now move to professionalize and regularize its total pattern of procedures and agreements as they relate to the negotiating council and with the various staff components. I will shortly propose to the Board of Education the creation of an Office of Staff Relations, reporting directly to the superintendent and serving an integral part of the superintendent's discharging of his duties. Here we are saying that it's the relationship between management and staff is such a critical relationship that it shouldn't be left to a part-time person, as skillful as a part-time person may be, that it requires and justifies the utilization of a person who's looking at those relationships continuously and working with the staff to help to develop the kinds of concerns that will resolve some of the learning problems, some of the things that grow into confrontation, that tend to deal with sources of friction, so that we can have a high esprit de corps throughout our system. And I don't want to imply that that in any way downgrades the negotiations. It upgrades them to a kind of operation that demands the best talent of the best qualified person full time. We propose to get that underway shortly. The Bay Area, this is number 7, is uniquely rich in resources which can and must be tapped for the strengthening of our schools. Universities, industries, and business firms need to be systematically given opportunities to deepen their roles in the school community. By November 15th, we hope to create an office of resource development to coordinate this effort. It's a shame that we're not making the maximum use of all of the rich facilities. I was talking to someone from UC Berkeley, and the only thing that person could see was, it was almost with myopic blinders type vision, could see tutorial programs. I said, a great university such as UC Berkeley, why shouldn't the department that deals with landscape architecture, why shouldn't that go over that little school that almost broke my heart the day I was there? and sit down and plan with that community how to beautify that place. I'm talking about using the full resources of the university and not limiting it just to a tutorial project here, an intern program there. We're getting ready to move into a kind of PBBS arrangement, planning, programming, budgeting system arrangement, where we're talking about management by objectives and all the rest. And it means getting principals and teachers and community geared up and tooled up so they can know how to look at resources and then look at their objectives and then array those objectives in some kind of priority order and say that this is where we want to put the most money in. That takes training. Why shouldn't a business school of one of these great universities share with us their expertise in the staff development effort to get people ready to deal with this kind of management system? I'm talking about expanding the involvement far beyond the piddling approach that has been used. I'm talking about the kind of relationship with industry and with the commercial establishments that really add a dimension of reality and relevance to the instruction of children. So that they, instead of studying an abstract subject such as biology, away from the real world, they get a chance to go into some of the hospitals and work along in the laboratories as partners in research. I'm talking about the occupational level courses. I remember running a big high school, and we had some occupational level courses: sign painting, upholstering, drapery and slipcover making, power sewing. Those were the courses, and there were a couple of others. And I made a study one day of how many of our graduates ever got jobs in the courses in which they had been trained. And I went to one of the brothers and I said, "Friend, you've been operating an occupational level course that purports to get people ready to enter the sign painting industry. And I perceive that in the last 2 years, no child has gotten a job painting a sign. Now you came from industry and you have contacts out in the field. Now I'm going to give you 2 periods off a week to go and reestablish those contacts. Open the door so some children will get jobs. Otherwise, we are going to miss you next year." You see, that's accountability. That's accountability. The brother went out, had me come down to a little place called a Rickshaw Inn in New Jersey, and I spoke to the people there about this whole business. And it was a Delaware Valley Sign Association. And I talked to them about my concept that children ought to have hands-on experience. And we went on and played out that whole thing that we're not coming asking you to help us. We're really here to help you. To give you a chance to participate in the development of a reservoir of well-trained potential employees. And they got the message. We began to put children out 2 or 3 days a week, and they began to learn rigging, something we'd never taught at our high school. How to rig those signs and lift those heavy things up. They learned something about the neon business and how you bend glass, something we'd never taught. And every kid who finished the course got a job the next year. I'm talking about accountability. I'm talking about using resources in the community, not in the usual way where we go out and visit. We're going to do some of that too. We'll continue. That's useful. Not in the usual way where we bring some chap in and he stands up and says, "I made it, you can do it too." We're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep doing that. That's useful. But we're going to do more. We're going to use the community as a living laboratory where children can go out and learn. This addresses itself to the notion that Learning of a high quality can take place in a number of settings. Too long we've had the notion that learning had to take place with some chairs, a blackboard, and a teacher standing in the front of the room. So we're hoping then by November 15th to have an office charged with this responsibility. Number 8, I am completely committed to the belief that whatever the outcome of these efforts, the battle will be won or lost out in the field, in your school, in your classroom. The central office must function more as a service center and a foundation and less as a military headquarters. Now, to give meaning to this idea and to assist in freeing up those ideas in the field that will speed us toward our objective, I will establish by October 15th a new Notions for Excellence Fund of $100,000. We will commit funds to those proposals which turn schools more sharply to meet their priorities, which develop on a one-grant basis a new instructional capability, which have measurable objectives and replicability elsewhere in the system. Tentative plans called for $60,000 of this fund to be for proposals involving a total school, $30,000 for individual teachers' grants for projects up to $500, and $10,000 for activities designed, organized with the approval of the principal and carried out by students. The decisions will be made by a fund committee consisting of principals, teachers, and students, and perhaps some central office input. I want you to get the concept here. What we're saying is that we realized a long time ago that one person sitting behind the desk trying to decide what's best for a city full of children is doomed to mediocre success or abject failure. That the collective wisdom of the group, everybody putting his mind to work on how the job can get done, will give us a better chance of meeting the needs of children. So we're not only saying that your ideas are important, we're setting up a fund to pay for the ideas so that it'll help you to implement them and carry them out on a day-to-day basis. It may sound strange that students can have ideas, but we want to give $10,000 so that students can make their proposals and talk about what we can do to improve reading in our school, the Each One Teach One by Youth Itself approach. And as those programs and proposals hit our desks and this committee searches them through, we'll be funding them. I happened to operate a school one time where I used to say to teachers that the only limitation on what we can do with and for our children is your commitment, your willingness to give of yourself, your own creativity, your own imagination. Those are the only limitations we have, because it's wide open. And it wasn't surprising to me that in that system, when we had an innovative teacher grant come through, that at that high school I was operating, we won more, half again as much really, innovative teacher grants than any other school in the city. And they were able, these teachers, to win those grants because they had really begun to realize that their ideas were important, that someone would help them get them started. And that's what we want to do here. Generate ideas from the field and let the White House fund them and get you started. Now, I've really given about 8 things that the administration is holding itself responsible for. About 8 things. And we're saying that you can hold us accountable. If we don't do it by a certain date, and this is going to be in writing, we have two distinguished columnists here, journalists that I know personally, who are taking all this down. Miss Mitchell and Mr. Nett, they'll have it all down, and you'll read it. And we stand accountable. And if we don't make it, you have a right to say, well, Mark, you said you were going to do it. What happened? And I have to stand before you and let you know. Now, if we're willing to lay that kind of responsibility on ourselves, I don't think it's too much to ask you to join us in taking certain responsibilities. And I'd like to suggest now some of the things that I would want you to commit yourself to. And not just you, I'm in it with you. Although I made these commitments, I'm making the same commitments to help you do the things that I'm going to challenge you now in a few minutes to make your commitment to accomplishing. I'm calling upon each teacher to take on the heavy personal and professional responsibility of setting your own instructional goals, objectives for this year. I want to get the two clarified. The goals are the overarching things that we are trying to do for the system. The objectives are what you are saying you are going to do with and for your children in that year. Whatever the program is, whether it's in the shop area, physical education area, English, the basic skills area, wherever your area of responsibility happens to be, I'm asking each teacher to begin now the process of establishing objectives for this year and set them in measurable terms. You know, the way objectives used to be stated in broad terms. Our objective is to bring about meaningful growth on the part of children so that they will be happy, functioning individuals in a complex society. That's a way to say nothing. I'm talking about a teacher who would dare to say, I'm committed to producing 1 month growth for each month of instruction in the basic skills. That's my commitment. I want a teacher to say that. I want to teach in areas where children are 2 and 3 grades behind, some brave souls to dare to say, I'm going to produce 1.5 growth per month for each month. And some real brave sisters and brothers will say, I'm going to dare to say I'll give you 2 for 1 in the basic skills. That's the kind of objective I'm talking about, the kind you can measure. If you have a class that children are cutting you in the high school, and you should have 45, well, not, I hope not, 35 children in your room, and only 10 are coming on the late shift, showing up, then your objective ought to be to change the cutting pattern in your room. And that's measurable. And you ought to state that in something like 3 months, I'm going to reduce cutting in my room to 0. It's a measurable objective. And it means getting on the phone at night and saying, Johnny, where were you? How dare you cut me, man? You know, you're ruining my whole objective here. Yeah. See that? Somehow we're going to have to find ways of making our big anonymous institutional more personal, where people feel they're part of something and somebody cares. So if that's where you have to start in getting the children to come to you, then start there, but state it in measurable terms. If you look at your watch and see that by the time you get down to teaching, you've blown 15 minutes of the period, your first objective ought to be to get a better system so you don't waste time like that. And if you don't know how to do it, you ought to call for some help. So I'm talking about using educational resources, but I want everyone to begin to explore, not in any grand sounding terms, what is in her objectives. I want you to lay out your objectives in a very practical way based on the most important needs that your children manifest. Now I realize that the first effort at this may not be as perfect as you want it to be, but we have to start somewhere. You may come up with a few objectives and decide, well, this really wasn't what I should be doing. Then you can change it. But I'm laying upon you, each teacher, a charge to begin that process immediately. Now, as each classroom teacher begins to talk about what it is he's trying to do for his children and with them, then those objectives collectively become the objectives of the school. Because we're talking about school-wide objectives. If you have a school, and I could name one in this town, that has a dropout rate in excess of 60%, then it's obvious you're going to have to do something about that. That may become one of your primary objectives, to reduce the dropout rate, well, by 50%. Set an impossible task. Give yourself something to reach for. But the objectives really should be within your grasp. But you don't begin talking about, I'm going to raise reading by so many degrees and so many grade levels, if half your children are in the street. If your attendance pattern is running where your ADA is somewhere down in the 60% group, then obviously, if you've got 40% of your children out in the street, you can't claim to have a viable educational program. So that becomes one of your early objectives. Not by the end of the year, but in 3 months, to raise the average daily attendance 15 percentage points. I'm talking about how you set measurable objectives, so if you don't get there, you have a way of getting handles on why didn't we make it. See, accountability and management by objectives is not a technique for getting rid of people. To say, I caught you. You didn't do what you said you're going to do. Get out. It's not that at all. Management by objectives is a way of getting people to say what they want to do, look at their resources, try to match what they say they're going to do with their resources, and then say at the end of the period, in a time frame, we either made it or we didn't. And if we didn't make it, then let's sit down and talk about it. It's a way of going back, looking at performance, and finding out what the difficulties were. That in every contract he's written since then is that every child in the program must have attended 80% of the time. See, what had happened, he'd signed a performance contract and the children were coming and going. And although they were there, he had the same number of children, but he didn't have them over the period of time long enough for the training to take effect. So what I'm saying to you is that if you have objectives, you can begin to look at why you made your objectives or why you didn't, and then begin to gear your program to reach those objectives. Number 2, then I'm asking that each school site, building objectives on what teachers have said they're going to do in individual classrooms, that each school have at least a preliminary statement of what their objectives are for the term by November 15th. I don't think that's an impossible mission. I think it's an essential one. Number 3, I've said that we will produce multiple options for parent and community participation by November 1st. Discussions as to the ways of strengthening your activities in this area can get underway immediately. Some schools might be ready to go with a renewed plan tomorrow, some in 2 months. But it's my hope that all will come to at least a tentative agreement for submission by February 15th. Now, I know that the principals who are here in this audience realize that for all intents and purposes, February 15th is really tomorrow. But we must capitalize on the forward movement. See, if we don't do some of these things in year 1, in a new administration, they won't be done. So we're going to have to move forward immediately. And I'm asking you to lay that responsibility upon yourselves. to look at the options for community involvement, ways of deepening and strengthening meaningful contacts, and by February 15th, evolve something that's yours, that your school is committed as that way of opening that channel so that we can have the kind of communication with parents that will make a difference in the learning of their children. Number 4, with your efforts in setting objectives, getting underway immediately, and the new Notions for Excellence Fund being set up by October 15th, we anticipate that the Fund Committee can begin receiving and reviewing proposals by early in November. What I'm saying to you here is that for us to make $100,000 available for new notions and no new notions be generated makes it a fruitless endeavor and a futile endeavor. And I'm asking you, I'm depending upon you to submit your proposals, get them ready, and they must be related to the objectives of your school and your personal objectives. They must be able to be tested out in measurable terms, but to get them in, and by early November, we should be sending out the checks to get your programs underway. Well now, this is where we are and where we're going. I've taken a long time to lay out the elements of the program, and I'm grateful for your patience. Perhaps I've made it sound unnecessarily complicated, but it's quite simple. It's quite simple. Our children are going to perform at grade level or better, or we're going to know the reason why. That's what it all boils down to.